everyone. Good morning and welcome to today's webinar for the 2020 MQii Learning Collaborative titled How Malnutrition Presents in Patients with Mental Health Conditions. We're very excited to share this with you today. So as a reminder for this webinar, all of your lines will be muted. If you do have any questions or technical issues, please share them with us. You can either use the Q&A function in the top right or the chat function within WebEx in the bottom middle of your screen indicated on this slide. We will then pose any questions that come in to our speakers at the end of the webinar. So I will briefly introduce our speakers for today, starting with April Hackert. So April N. Hackert is a psychiatric culinary medicine research registered dietitian nutritionist and the founder of Choose to Change Nutrition Services. As a scientific thinker and researcher, April brings her creative food chemistry-inspired culinary techniques to offer dynamic and practical tools for optimizing cognitive and gastrointestinal communication. April uses 2 decades of clinical experience and rigorous scientific training to showcase the impact of food on mental health. Her research examines the dietary components and subjective behavioral food patterns of humans with symptoms of anxiety. She speaks globally on the topic of malnutrition in psychiatric conditions and currently serves as chair and executive committee member of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics Behavioral Health Nutrition Dietetic Practice Group. She has earned degrees from Valencia College, Virginia Tech, New York University, and completed academic training at UCSF, Stanford, UC Berkeley, Harvard, and University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. So with that, I will turn it over to April to talk about the connections between mental health and malnutrition.
Thank you so much, and I genuinely would like to thank the Malnutrition Improvement Initiative to being able to help all of us as clinicians expand our understanding of our foundational understanding of nutrition and how that the clinical signs of malnutrition are going to be relevant in an individual who's struggling with mental health conditions, but how it's looking is going to be very different. And so what I want to help you understand, along with my dear colleague and friend that you're going to get to talk with a little bit here, is I want you to understand that when you're looking at your clients and your patients in a medical unit, in an ICU unit, in an outpatient clinic, there is mental health conditions. Mental health is now taking over as the global indicator of how we are seeing disease. We have over 1 billion people on this planet as of 2016 who are struggling with some sort of mental health or substance use disorder. It's 7% of our global burden of disease, and you are going to lose a significant portion of quality living by not being able to manage this disability. Now, we as clinicians, myself included, I was trained in a very highly academic medical model in New York City alongside doctors, and everything that we talked about and everything that we documented was malnutrition, kwashiorkor, marasmus. Like, I could point out stages of malnutrition like no one else, and it was just because we had to as dietitians. And when I found myself into psychiatry and specializing in this area because this was my calling, what I had to do is I had to go back and take a look at the definition. And this is what I wanted to start us off with for this topic is let's look at this definition. So Webster's Medical Dictionary, just basic as we would train any students or anyone that we had been trained under, is malnutrition is defined as faulty nutrition due to inadequate or unbalanced intake of nutrients or their impaired assimilation or utilization. We know that there's 6 essential nutrients. These are all basic concepts that we as a dietitian know. However, when we are documenting, we're looking for specific parameters of malnutrition. But what I want to share with you and urge you to see is that when we are looking at mental health and we are looking at substance use disorders and how those conditions manifest within our 12 organ systems as a human, this definition is inclusive, but it's not all encompassing. And so we need to make sure that we understand how our work is actually picking up malnutrition and mental health, because one of the key pieces of this dietitian, which is our last point here, is weight is not mentioned. So what I mean by that is that it's not that weight is not important, and it's not that weight is not going to be an indicator, but it is a tool. It is one tool in our chest to be able to get someone access to a dietitian or being able to show them tangible results. But when you are working with someone who has a mental health condition, it's so much more complicated. So in the next 10 minutes or so, what I want to do is I want to give you a really intense biochemical primer on where we are in the field of nutritional neuroscience, where we are with gut microbiome, where we are with clinical assessment of attachment, and how that nutritional neuropsychology, which is the intersection between neuroscience, nutrition, and psychology, that motivation of why we eat what we eat, our stages of change, our resistance, our barriers, these are the indicators of malnutrition, and how we document them is going to be so important, because if we can't get our clients in to see a dietitian, because there's so few in the country right now that are specializing this, they're not going to get the appropriate all-encompassing healthcare that they need. So buckle up. We're going to go on a really great adventure for the next 10 minutes, and then Sharon is going to help us understand how one avenue of getting people treatment is through her work. So I want to start off with where we are in our current mental health clinical assessment. So the first thing we have to pay attention to is that disease is what is typically going to bring a client in to see us. They're not going to notice their anxiety and then be able to say, I should go see a dietitian to monitor my electrolyte function. Humans are not at that place of awareness when it comes to mental health, and us as clinicians aren't even at that place to understand, because the literature isn't there, and our understanding of nutrition and mental health is just in its infancy. The field of nutritional psychiatry is less than 5 years old. It is a very, very young field of medicine, and it is growing rapidly. And so I want to make sure that you guys have what you need. So let's start off with knowing that we wait for a clinical indicator. The food regimen and their behavioral processes, they're not immediately discussed, but that is where we pay attention to. We stop at that place. Our role as a registered dietitian, our big barrier is access to the individuals who need our treatment and need our advice and need our knowledge. And Sharon's going to talk a lot about some of the things she's noticed with access. And then this last one, which all of us manage on a daily basis, no matter what our specialty, is our food confusion and the culture of how that, whether or not you need to avoid gluten or wheat, or whether or not certain fatty acids are appropriate. And one of the other phrases you'll see here on the bottom of this slide is a psychobiotic. If you are not familiar with this, one of the trainings that is going to be coming up within the BHN DPG of the Academy is we're going to be doing a webinar on psychobiotics, and what that means. It'll be in April. And so what that means is that the foods that we consume are altering the microbiome, which we all know, but yet the reality is that the microbiome is generating neurotransmitters that is then giving a feedback loop to our brain and our nervous system about how we should behave. And so our foods are actually psychobiotic, meaning that what we put in our body is influencing our thought. That is very well established in the literature now. But how we as registered dietitians jump into that stream of consciousness and honesty is where our clinical state really needs to be able to be expanded as well as investigated as a group. Now, one of the other pieces that can make things a little complicated as we're trying to navigate malnutrition and mental health is the biological basis of this. As I just mentioned, the gut microbiome is governing a lot of our nervous system behavior, and the gut and the brain are connected through the HPA axis and through all of these digestive feedback mechanisms. But the problem that we have is we have a little bit of some archaic thinking, not because of inaccuracy, but because of not looking globally. So first and foremost, energy imbalance. We are not bank accounts. Energy in versus energy out is not complete. That is not accurate. And the reason why it's not accurate is that every human system has a different absorptive capacity. Every human system has a different microbiome profile, and every mitochondria in every person's cell puts out specific amounts of ATP based upon their own individual genetic tendencies, hydration status, and even fatty acid consumption. So to make an assumption and to continue to teach our clients and the individuals that we work with that it really is just energy in versus energy out, it's making it too simple and also not making it fully encompassing of all the factors that influence energy balance and wellness. And most importantly, I feel like, and this is a little bit of my clinical experience, is that it sets a stage for people to feel failure, because if they consume the wrong number of something and then they don't have that imbalance, that psychological state of feeling inadequate or feeling like they just didn't quite hit the mark, that actually increases cortisol levels, and that increases feedback to the brain that they're under stress, which then increases cravings for carbohydrates and refined salt. So it's a feedback mechanism that if we can eliminate a lot of the shame and the judgment, then we won't have a lot of these biological foundations as it relates to mental health. Now, I want to move through this just for the sake of time. The other piece that is a biological limitation is that we're not the same culture as we used to be. People are mutating genetically. They have different children with different cultures. And so humans in general are creating new genetic factors every single day. And that is the beauty of humanity. So we have multi-genetic, multi-ethnic backgrounds that makes our science change all the time as well. So my suggestion is to go back to some of the fundamentals that we learn as dietitians. Let's look at some pathways, and then let's talk to our patients and be able to really understand what they're needing in their lives. And lastly, I just mentioned a little bit about the microbiome, so I won't spend more time on that, but your physical activity and your intake are both specifically influencing the diversity and the landscape of the microbes that you have in your body. Now, where we're going to move through and into is helping you understand how your brain gets its perception of pleasure and joy, because that's really what humans want. We want dopamine, we want happiness, and we want joy, and we will get it however we want. But humans truly desire salt, sugar, and fat from a human being in a cellular standpoint. We need that glycogen for our brain and our muscles. Our eyes are wanting those carbohydrates because the eyes are the external projections of the brain that are taking in signals around us and then having those messages get stored and processed. And then also, as I mentioned, our neurotransmitters, we need those reward systems to be functioning properly. So dopamine, serotonin, opiate systems, endocannabinoid systems, all of those systems, all of those highways are helping us stay grounded. And everyone has their own highway. Some people live on the west coast of the United States and some people live on the east coast of the United States, but we're all trying to get to where we want to go. And each highway is going to tell us our own tendencies and our preferences. So when a client comes into your clinic or your office, what I want you to think about is ask yourself, sugar, salt, or fat? What is one of the primary mechanisms that this person in front of me is really driving after? And that can give you some clues into which neural pathway they're actually trying to pay attention to in their own maybe unconscious, but often conscious drive to receive pleasure. Now, where things are at with psychiatry, and I've been practicing in this area for about 20 years, and it's been very lonely in the field, but it's been wonderful to find a lot of really interesting information as a dietitian and to meet the power of collaborating with different colleagues and different psychiatrists and therapists. But where humans are at right now, in my opinion, as it relates to nutrition and mental health, is we have erratic patterns of eating and time. The liver and the digestive system has no consistency for when it has to actually digest. And when that happens, there's more cognitive distress due to unpredictability. We have a lack of variety because we've focused on safety and calories in our eating patterns, and that leads to gut microbiome dysbiosis. It means that there is not as many species around, and when you have only a few types of species, you get into a pattern and the body then loses its resiliency to deal with stress and to cope with new emotional experiences, and a lack of hydration. It's the biggest thing that I see as a clinician is that without proper hydration, we can't make metabolism move the way that it needs to in the liver and in the intestines. We have gluconeogenesis that's staying on for longer than it needs to be. And also we have periods of time now where people are inducing gluconeogenesis through ketosis and through other patterns. But the reality is the body wants to run on carbohydrates. It's clean, easy burning fuel. And if we put in a good balance and we have enough soluble and insoluble fibers, typically everything should be fine. And usually when you're coping and managing your stress really well, there aren't a lot of digestive issues. But the problem is that we have this emotional component and this psychological component that really disrupts a lot of absorption and metabolic efficiency. And the consequence of this is that it can lead to cerebral atrophy and demyelination. And that is what, in my expertise as an eating disorder specialist, is what propels a lot of that distorted thinking. And so when you have a client that's coming into your office and they're potentially not seeing things as accurately as maybe you're seeing it as a clinician in their health parameters or how things are working in their life, what I want to encourage you and I want to challenge you to think about is that maybe there is some biological deficiencies, maybe there is some fatty acid deficiencies, maybe there's a hydration issue that's not allowing their nervous system to function to its best capacity. And if you can start thinking about that, you might see some clues of malnutrition and then document that in a way that allows that person to be able to continue to keep working with you. So I'm going to kind of move into the last little section here and then get ready to turn things over to Sharon so she can tell you a little bit more about what she's been doing in her clinical work. But I just want to remind you of some hard truths, is that poor diet and high blood pressure are now #1. We do have a global burden of disease study that came out in 2017 that actually has more direct statements about the impact of diet. But diet in and of itself, we know, is one of the primary things that is afflicting humans. 68% of our energy intake is derived from ultra-processed foods, and ultra-processed foods are disrupting our endothelial and our microbiome diversity. So we need to explore that as dietitians. And this is also very important for you to understand. And I would encourage you, in the purpose of me sharing all of this complexity with you in this short amount of time, is I want to make you curious. I want to make you curious to go learn more. And I want to make you curious to seek out training, because this is the field that we need to be in to help people really develop better relationships with food. Is that you'll see here on your screen on the top, you have this prefrontal cortex, hippocampus, amygdala. These are the top-down learning processes in our cortex. These are the emotional states. This is maturity. This is logic. These are the things that tell us to have, balance in our eating and not take down that entire half gallon of ice cream in one sitting because we might get a stomach ache. This part of the brain does not fully form until we're 25, 26 years of age. But in the end, the whole point behind this is that we are trying to get dopamine, and that comes from the nucleus accumbens through the VTA pathway. Now, you can also see that there's a bottom-up regulation, which is that the hypothalamus, this is the foundational survival part of our brain, that is hunger, that is stomach growling, that is low blood sugar. That's going to drive us to get dopamine as well. So we as dietitians, we have to help people understand this, but we also have to use the sensitivity that prefrontal cortex activity and positive reframing with a 19-year-old, probably not a good idea, but helping them develop a really sound structure where they keep their blood sugar stable, they're paying attention to hydration in a very conscious way, but that's not focused on rigidity, that is absolutely going to help them get that pleasure they need and help their brain finish to forming. Now, just for you to know, to make yourself curious, the human brain, we have these lobes. We have two primary types of cell, which are glial cells and neurons. Neurons are the highways, and the glial cells are the immune cells, or the cells that provide our brain with nutrition and manage the waste and all of the biological functions. So we have more glial cells than neurons. And then structural, what we have here is on the top, you see two neurons, two synapses coming together. And if you remember from basic psychology and some biology way back in your training, you'll see on the left-hand side, on the bottom portion, you have a neurotransmitter being released out of that vesicle. It's going across the synapse and binding to a receptor. Now, that communication between there is is an actual communication of a thought or a hormonal signal, and that is actually produced through this mechanism, which is actually sodium and potassium dependent. You have an action potential, which is the same as any any muscular cell in the neuron. It functions the same way, but the threshold for the action potential is going to change. Now, what all this means is that the faster someone's thinking, the more sodium, potassium is going in and out of the cell at faster rates. So if someone has anxiety or they're not able to slow their thoughts down, it's because their brain is thinking really, really fast. And if someone is struggling with maybe depression and they just can't get motivated, sometimes that is because primarily their electrolytes are off. So you as a dietitian, what I want to help you understand is that the faster the brain is trying to think and manage stress or managing life, the more the body is going to want easier food. So it's going to crave things that it doesn't have to put a lot of energy into, because that's what's going to keep the brain happy. And the brain being happy is what keeps the body happy. So here's your last piece, and then I'm going to turn things over to Sharon, and we'll kind of wrap things up together as kind of this clinical piece of how you as a dietitian can move forward with this information. This slide right here is the recipe card for emotions. You see the top ones are our essential amino acids. We know about this. And then we know that our unessential, but our non-essential amino acids are in gray. We make recipes together. So for example, if you look on the left-hand side, tryptophan is the precursor to serotonin, which is also the precursor to melatonin, and that is going to lead to the perception of being sleepy or sated. And then you go into a different pathway, and particularly I'd like to make you aware of the GABA section on the right-hand side. In the field of psychiatry, the GABA system and those amino acids coming together, glutamate in particular, this is where the pharmaceutical industry is trying to help people with mental health conditions. Well, we as dietitians, we spend a lot of time studying and understanding about the difference between glutamine and glutamate and methylation and all these wonderful cellular things that we learn about. It's time to put them into practice and help people with malnutrition and mental health issues really, really ask this question. So I'm going to turn the ball over to Sharon. I'm going to have her jump to where she needs to be with her slides. And then when we come back for the kind of the final points of summarizing and bringing this together, I want to share a chart with you that I've created as a clinician that I think you might be able to walk away with. And we'll leave that up while we're answering some Q&A so you can take this in. But this is from my clinical experience and my years and years of research. So I want to share that with you, but I'm going to turn this over to Sharon so she can get you excited about the work she's doing in her clinic and being able to help you as a dietitian know where you can go with this interest in nutrition and mental health. So thank you for listening to this very brief but yet intense overview of nutritional psychiatry. So Sharon, I'm going to give the floor to you.
Okay. I am Sharon Lemons.
Hi, Sharon. Oh, sorry. I'll just go ahead and introduce Sharon.
Okay.
Thanks so much. So Sharon Lemons is actually a close colleague and friend of April. And a member of MQii herself. So we're very excited for her to be here. So Sharon's current focus is nutrition in the mental health setting and educating dietitians about nutrition for individuals who have autism. She participated in the development of the standards of practice and standards of professional performance for dietitians working with individuals with intellectual and developmental disorders in 2012. She's held various positions in the Behavioral Health and Nutrition Dietary Practice Group over the last 15 years, where she now serves as the House of Delegates representative. She worked in the field of developmental disabilities as a pediatric dietitian for early childhood intervention in the Denton State Supported Center for a total of 9 years. She worked 6 years as a renal dietitian for both Fresenius and DaVita. Sharon received both her bachelor's degree in dietetics and institutional administration in 2001 and her master's degree in nutrition from Texas Women's University in 2004. So thanks very much, Sharon. Please take it away.
All right. Good morning to all of you. My disclosure is that I'm an employee of MHMR, and that's the program I'm going to be discussing with y'all. So I was recruited to come back to MHMR. That's where I worked for early intervention, and to start a very unique program. And this program is providing nutrition counseling within the mental health clinics throughout all of Tarrant County, which is in the Fort Worth area. So this has been an interesting undertaking. I started in May, and then it took us till September to get the codes in the computer. So as I'm talking about this, remember that this is a program in its infancy. I have been seeing patients actively since September, so I'm on month 5 of this. But I mean, the organization I work for has been servicing the mental health community for nearly 50 years, and they are now My Health, My Resources, MHMR. They are community-based. They service youth and adults. We service individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, mental health conditions, and substance use disorders. I am able to see any of those within that realm. The only area that I don't service that MHMR does is the children in early intervention, and they do have their own dietitians, but I am the only one for the rest of the corporation. So everything we do is person-centered, and our motto is "We change lives," and I am truly hoping that we are going to be able to change lives with this program. So let me tell you a little bit about the demographic I see. The demographic I see is an area that I never thought I'd be servicing. And many times the people that walk into my office for nutrition counseling are homeless, or they have very low income, or they have no income and they're totally dependent upon someone else. They have all of them have some sort of mental health diagnosis, or else they wouldn't be in my office. And frequently, we find that there's some sort of trauma that has impacted their dietary intake. So that has been an extremely interesting aspect as well. So let me tell you about the resources we have here. The corporation that I work for is my segment of it is a CCBHC. So what is that? It is a certified community behavioral health clinic. It was established by the Mental Health Act of 2014, which was a bipartisan act. It's designated as a Medicaid provider, and there are some augmented payments through Medicaid for this. We work with designated collaborative organizations. As far as I know, I'm the only dietitian in the country doing this. I have found where there was one CCBHC that had an advertisement for a part-time dietitian in New York, and that's the only other time I have seen dietitians associated with this. So many of you may be called upon to be the designated collaborative organization. That's within the realm that we can work with other organizations, and your hospitals or your workplace may very well be called upon to be that collaborating organization. And they do encourage the use of telemedicine, which we tried with me for a little bit, and I'll just say we're going to have to revisit that. Okay, so let me go back and tell you a little bit about how many there is on that. This was established through the Protecting Access to Medicare Act, and initially there was 8 states that put together, well, there was many states, but there was 8 states selected that to pilot the CCBHC. Those 8 states operated for a period of 2 years. And then since then, there has been more states added, and currently there is 24 states on the list that that have CCBHCs. And as you can tell, this is all very much in its infancy. So here's some more information about CCBHCs. There is 9 specific services that CCBHCs must provide. So looking through this, you can see we need the targeted case management, the crisis services, and all of those kinds of things. Where the dietitian comes in is in some of that screening, assessment, and diagnosis. Part of that diagnosis frequently has to do with their physical health, not just their mental health. We're supposed to be looking at the whole person here, okay? So we do this person-centered aspect, and while it says patient-centered, if you say person-centered, patient-centered, it's the same thing. So these are outpatient and facilities, and there's an aspect of it that I really like that is also specifically for the veterans. So if you decide you want more information about this, and maybe you get called upon to be one of those collaborative organizations, I've provided you some resources over here, and this is where I got all my information within this presentation. Is these centers, the Center of Medicaid and Medicare, substance abuse, and criteria. Within that substance abuse, that SAMHSA website, there is criteria for certified community behavioral health clinics, the CCBHCs. And one of the organizations that comes out and trains us actually is this last one, the National Council on Behavioral Health. So they are a really good source. If you get called upon to be a collaborative organization, this is where I would go to find more information and about how things are going and first, actually. Okay, so here's some aspects of the patient care at a CCBHC, and these are directly from this document up here, the criteria for demonstration and program to improve community mental health centers and established certified CCBHCs. Okay, these were the aspects that I thought related to nutrition. Patient-centered care, we know that we all need to be doing this. This is something that we all need to be working with. And IDT coordination, medical, psychosocial, emotional, therapeutic, and recovery support needs. That right there pulls us in. That coordination of the medical part is what brings in the dietitians. Okay. And then the initial assessment, and like I said, this wording is directly from this document. This initial assessment, and this may be where you're pulled in as a dietitian, or where some of the CCBHCs may do like my organization did and hire their own dietitian, is that we do have to assess the needs for medical care. All right. So why is there a dietitian here in the CCBHC? Well, there are specific quality measures that CCBHCs have to report. That these are their metrics of what they are doing that is being reported back, and they include BMI, which, as we've already discussed, BMI is not the end-all and be-all. However, it does get them into my office. There's many quality measures. These are just the ones that relate to nutrition. Some of the CCBHCs also work with the children in their family, so the children's weight is assessed. Controlling hypertension, and this one is actually a measure of has it improved or not. Diabetes screening for patients on antipsychotic measurements, on antipsychotic medicines. These individuals, whenever they are placed on these medications. Many of these medications promote weight gain, and I'm seeing as much, 50 to 100 pounds weight gain in 1 year. 50 pounds in 6 months is not an unusual referral to me. So this definitely puts them at risk of diabetes and other things. So this is one of those. The diabetes care for serious mental illness, metabolic monitoring for the children and adolescents on antipsychotics, all of those are specific measures that the CCBHCs have to report. So where does malnutrition fall into this? Well, as I see these individuals and they come into my office, I find that as I'm looking at their diet and taking their food recalls, what I'm finding is that many of them have a primarily carbohydrate diet. One of the individuals that I have seen once, and I'd love to get her back in my office, but I haven't managed to yet. She actually lives on the street, and she, once a week, her mother comes and gets her, and she spends the food stamps that she gets, and she buys 2-liter bottles of soda. So she's living on the street, and all she is consuming is soda, which she carries in her backpack in these 2-liter bottles. She weighs 500 pounds. So, I mean, as you can tell, that's while the weight is a concern, the bigger concern to me is she is getting no other nutrition other than carbohydrates. There's no protein, there's no fiber, there's no vitamin, there's no minerals, there's no nothing. It's just carbohydrates that she's getting. So that's where malnutrition comes in, is these diets that are just really off from what you would expect to find. I also have people walk in my office that have a lot of misinformation, and they're convinced that whatever the latest diet is right now, keto, is big, but that's not the only one they come in discussing. It's whichever one somebody has proposed to them last, frankly, most of the time, that this is the diet that they need to go on, and here's how they're going to do it. And they come in telling me how they're going to improve their diet because they're going to be following this plan. And I try to bring them back to balance and those kinds of things. Okay. So the conditions that I'm seeing, what I get referred for is, first of all, that overweight. Probably 90% of my referrals say weight, and that's it. And then whenever I get them in and start talking to them, I discover probably at least half have irritable bowel syndrome. And we talk about balance and those kinds of things in order to try to get that under control. And then I am also seeing an awful lot of eating disorders. A few of them are diagnosed before they walk into my office. However, I frequently am the one going back to the psychiatrist and saying, can we diagnose eating disorders in this individual? Like I said, the diabetes, the kidney disease, the high blood pressure, and then once in a while I get some labs on high cholesterol and those kinds of things. And then I also get some that want to walk in and just improve their diet. As they walk in, I find that many times what's happening is they really have some major concerns, but the way they expressed it to their the person who referred them, which can be a nurse or it can be a mental health professional, a QMHP, or a psychiatrist, what they've expressed is, oh, I want to improve my diet. And in reality, when they get into my office, most of the time they have something much more or severe going on. So how do we talk about malnutrition? Well, how's it assessed? Before they get to me, the physicians, the nurses look at things like waist circumference, BMI. Waist circumference was not listed as one of the metrics. However, I've been told that that was added. So we'll have to see how that plays out. When they get to me, I do a nutrition-focused physical exam, and we talk about some of those signs of malnutrition. And as April's already pointed out, dehydration frequently is really big, and I try to point out some of those issues for them. Okay. So how am I addressing all of this malnutrition? Well, I have gone back to the most basic form of counseling and nutrition that I've ever, done as a dietitian. I'm doing things like talking about hunger and fullness cues. The gentleman that walked into my office that weighed 386 pounds and he was homeless and he was eating at the homeless kitchen and 3 meals a day, I had to sit down and talk to him about, well, you've been homeless for 3 years and you've gotten every single meal in those 3 years. Maybe we can talk about that there's a little confidence that you're going to get that next meal and you don't have to eat everything they put on your tray. So that's a major part of what I do is talking about the hunger, the fullness cues. I've been known to do some grocery store tours to help people pick out foods that are better for their diet. Many of these folks that can do it, I will talk to them about a FODMAPs diet for their IBS, and I have gone and done grocery store tours to help them pick out the foods that work best for that. Many times I have people coming in saying, oh, I just don't know how to make that, and we'll just sit and work on recipes. I will hand them a sheet where they sit down and they actually plan out their menu for the next week. What am I going to eat? All of those kinds of things. So what are the possibilities for the future? Well, I would love to see us collaborating with more people. This homeless kitchen, I know they're doing the best they can, and what they're working with is donations. But even the entree is carb laden because it's mixed with rice, it's mixed with pasta, those kinds of things. There's churches that literally drive by and hold out Ziploc bags full of food for people to come get out of their hand as they're driving through the area. I would love to work with some of the churches on some of the choices that they put in, because those bags are also primarily carb-laden foods. There's very little protein. There's fruits and vegetables are just non-existent, that kind of thing. And even the vending machine choices where the homeless individuals are living in the Fort Worth area primarily, the sodas are 25 cents. And frequently they can manage 25 cents. And the only thing in those machines are regular sodas. There's no diet sodas, there's no water, that kind of thing. We have started implementing a diabetes prevention program. It's not exactly how the CDC has it set up. We are not able to meet every single week, that kind of thing. But between myself and the nurses, we are doing the curriculum. We eventually would like to do a diabetes education program, the DMST, and we would also like to be able to collaborate with some of the eating disorder clinics, because I am seeing so many eating disorder or individuals. The other thing that I'm finding would be very beneficial would be a cooking class, because many of these people walk in and they tell me that they have no cooking skills whatsoever. So that's something that we're looking at implementing. Okay, so I appreciate you listening to my information on this particular program, and I want to let you know that we do have a dietary practice group that myself and April are members of. April is the chair. I'm the House of Delegates representative, Behavioral Health Nutrition, and that we do provide resources to individuals working in the 4 areas, which include the eating disorders, intellectual and developmental disabilities, the mental health, and addictions. So we are a resource for those of you who are finding yourselves working with individuals that fit that category. And quite frankly, if you're practicing in dietetics, I pretty much promise you, you're working with somebody who fits in one of those 4 categories. So I'm going to bring April back in and let her give us some final thoughts on this.
Well, I'm hoping we can do it together, Sharon. I'll let you take the power of the slides for sure. But no, before we open it up to some Q&A, as we had talked about, it is disclosure that Sharon and I, we've known each other quite some time. We've been in the trenches together, like working through the unknown state of how dietitians work in nutritional psychiatry and behavioral health. And so the part, Sharon, as I was listening to your piece that really jumped out to me was that you said, I'm going back to the most basic and fundamental skills of counseling that I've ever done as a dietitian, and you're 20 years into your career. But what I also want to say, I agree with you, because that was my work as well. It's really developmental training and bringing back those skills that people have not been able to obtain. But what I will say, which is what makes this so dynamic, is that the speed of the neurochemistry and the complexity of the interdisciplinary systems of the gut microbiome and digestion and the renal system and cardiovascular system, and then even the mention that you talked about with how the pharmaceuticals disrupt cravings, it's all in the hypothalamus. And so we as scientists, as clinicians, as dietitians, you are not going to find a more complicated area of specialty, because you have to think like a wizard while being in a grocery store helping someone know how to cut a piece of fruit for the first time at the same time. So the final thoughts, and Sharon, I'll have you finish these last two, the last 2 points, since you've been doing that directly, is I want to encourage you when you get with your patients to ask them to really keep it simple. A technique I used to use with adolescents who were struggling with eating disorders is to have them pick a food a week, 1 food a week that we're going to explore, we're going to learn about, we're going to touch, we're going to taste, we're going to cook, we're going to eat, and then through over that week or that session that you have with them, they get to think about how a food could fit into their life. And then the other part is that we as dietitians, please, we have to step up and be creative, and we have to help people get access to us however we can make that happen. So Sharon, do you want to finish these last 2 here?
Yeah, I mean, April and I have been hanging out much too long together. I also encourage people to explore 1 new food a week, and I encourage them to try to open up their thoughts to eating foods that maybe they're afraid of eating. Whenever they look at me and they say, "Oh, all processed food is bad," I definitely discourage overly processed foods, but I remind them, if you take that head of lettuce and you cut it in half, you just processed it. So I try to give them a little leeway to where they can buy foods that is within their skill set to be able to prepare for themselves, because what I'm finding is in my population, they're so afraid of the processed foods that they sit there and eat just basically nothing, and just because of the fear of those foods. So yes, and as I walk through the grocery store with people, I walk through and I just talk to them about what foods they like and where we can start. What things do you like, and then we go from there. So,
and I think the part why I wanted to mention in the beginning and sort of preface, that this is complex. Like, this is really complex, and that specialists in neuroscience don't know what we know about food, and we as dietitians are learning how to speak different languages around microbiome and neuroscience and psychology and psychiatry and therapy. But dietitians are the only medical professional that's trained to understand the science of food, and then also the behavioral component to that, of the attachment, the interviewing, the motivation. So we have to take our training and really kind of step up and use your own individual flavor and use your own gift. And then the other part, this is my own personal thing that I want to equip all of you. You're all brilliant, you're all smart, and you all know biochemistry very well. But the best way to learn it and to make it relevant is to teach it to other people. Teach it on your level. Go back and read about glycolysis. 6 to 3, 6 to 3, 6 carbons to 3 carbons, and water makes it happen. So if we can make it that simple for people, use building blocks, use Fisher-Price toys, use whatever you have to use to make that understood. Because if the brain is running this whole show, and we as dietitians can give that ball back to the person that's with themselves instead of them coming to us and wanting us to fix them, then they're going to get better because they have way more time with themselves than we do with them. And we're often challenged in being able to get access to these patients. So I wanted to kind of end the piece of it in knowing that all the complexity of the neurochemistry and the neuroscience, it's very much needed. You have all the clinical skills, but then the creativity is where we have to step up. And that's what a lot of what Sharon was talking about. So this is our contact information. This is how you can find us. You can find out what we're doing. Both Sharon and I are pretty strong advocates about dietitians using their voices in social media and finding a way, not because we think that we're, the be all end all, but it's that we want to make sure that there's a voice out there that is helping people understand. So I guess I'll close us with this. You guys can take down our information, and then whatever questions that the team here wants to offer us, the one ask that I would put out for MQii is if you can go back to our slide doc on your end and put up that chart that was at the end of my section. I just wanted the audience to be able to look at that while we're taking Q&A. Thank you. And what I mean by this for the audience who are getting this, there was a couple slides that I wanted to get to you, but it was more important for me to make sure that Sharon and I had a great conversation with all of you. In the doc that you are going to get from the company and kind of the whole registration benefits, there's a small section on culinary medicine. It's one more thing that I really want to encourage you to learn about. I'm happy to do more training about it. We're very limited in how much information we can share with you when we're opening up a brand new subject and a brand new area of practice for dietitians. So thank you. Check this out. This is something that I've created. It's evidence-based from the research, and it's 20 years worth of my understanding of how the human brain works. And it's a really great place to start. And you can check out how your individual person may deviate from this, but I have found this to be very effective and accurate. So thank you, everyone. And thank you, Sharon. It was always wonderful to hang out with you.
Always great to hang out with you, April. And I guess at this point, we need questions?
Yes, thank you both so much. So in our last roughly 5 minutes, I'll pose a couple questions to you. So I guess, and this could be for either of you, and you've touched on this slightly, but what would you say are indicators that physicians or therapists should look for that would suggest that a patient is at risk for or is malnourished and should see a registered dietitian?
Oh, so many. It's many times what the clinicians are looking at. My challenge is that all the clinicians that I am working with are psychiatrists. So what they're looking at is frequently just weight gain or weight loss, or just even conversations about how they're having challenges with food and those kinds of things. I would ideally like to actually train all my physicians on nutrition-focused physical exam, and the nurses and nurse practitioners and all of that kind of thing. But I would dearly love to see them all trained on that. I, you know, the labs, those kinds of things. I mean, there's just so many. But whenever one of the main things that I'm talking to my physicians about is just listening to the discussion and hearing whenever somebody's having some struggles with food in one way or the other.
The one thing I will add, a specific lab that I would encourage all mental health screening to have is MMA. It stands for methylmalonic acid. It's the upstream precursor to a B12 deficiency. Intrinsic factor is going to be changed, obviously we know is going to change with age. Individuals with eating disorders, potentially following a plant-based diet, are going to have impaired activation of intrinsic factor due to the phytates and a lot of the oxalates. And then furthermore, anyone who may be struggling with substance use issues, the pH of the gut is going to change, and so intrinsic factor will also get altered. The reason why MMA is so important is that B12 deficiency manifests as psychosis. And so many of the times, this is an amazing emergency room screen, if I could put that out to medicine, is that if you can screen people for MMA and someone may be coming in with some hostility or some sort of aggressive behavior, that is a quick clinical indicator to find out whether or not that is there. And if that is present, you're going to need to dig deeper into folate, methylation, vitamin A, E, but clinical indicator MMA. The other thing I will tell you, alkaline phosphatase will also be altered because if they don't have the ability to generate new protein and there's not adequate nutrition, the ALK phos will be off. Electrolytes in a chem panel are going to be normal. Individuals who are 30 pounds underweight struggling with severe eating disorders are going to have normal weights. That is not going to get us more treatment, but what it is it's going to be an educational standpoint that we have to look up other things.
Thank you so much. One last question. I know we're just about at time. So potentially mostly for Sharon or for both of you. Are you working with any local community-based organizations to help connect your patients to their services after they leave you, either for food resources or further education?
Yes, at the moment it's kind of on a case-by-case basis, but for example, I had somebody walk in my office that was he was losing weight like crazy, and he's in a transition house, and they can't provide him anything other than what they feed everybody else, and those kinds of things. As it turns out, he's got some enzyme issues, and they've now got him on enzymes from the local hospital is working with him in that direction. But I was able to collaborate with one of the missions, and this particular mission it's the Methodist Church downtown Fort Worth, that they hand out lunches on Mondays and Wednesdays, and for many of these folks that they're obviously losing weight, and I mean, this is just to their untrained eye. If they see that somebody is losing weight, they'll hand them an Ensure. So I was able to access through them a couple of extra Ensures for this gentleman to take back to his transition house and get permission to do that kind of thing. And so while I'm not managing as much collaboration with the community as I would like I said, I'm only really 5 months into actually seeing patients and figuring out what their needs are. So I also am hoping to collaborate more with the local food bank that actually does some cooking classes and see if we can't work on some of that as well.
And I know in the mindset of time we have to finish, but I wanted to share also just a little bit of my work, which is pretty unique. I have not found any other dietitians to go into this area. I'm actually starting to work with local law enforcement. And so I have connected with a community Blue Zone project nonprofit who are trying to bring the awareness of more plants and gardening and a lot of different more community-based organizations into a community. And I'm coming in as sort of a psychiatric expert in consultation to work with law enforcement to develop programs for the homeless and also the individuals who are battling substance use disorders on the street here where I'm currently located. There's a lot of homelessness. And also when the feeding and the malnutrition becomes extreme, then there's aggressive outbreaks. And that's not because of anything specific, it's because the brain and the amygdala are fearful. So I'm starting to work with local law enforcement and helping them understand that we need to be able to think creatively of how to help people better their lives.
Those sound like such wonderful partnerships. Thank you both for sharing that. So we are going to need to end our webinar for now. I thank you both again so much for your time and sharing your insights with our audience. We thank everybody for attending. As a reminder, we will send out the slides and CEU certificates after the webinar, and we will let everyone know when the video is available on the MQii website. So thank you again. I hope you have a great rest of your day.